It is crash course time, ladies, endocrine style. In the coming days, we are going to learn molecular metabolism, so the way your cells use energy. And there are diseases that involve molecular metabolism, but they're super rare and they're super complicated. So we just don't want to go there. But I still want some clinical applications with this cellular metabolism unit. So instead, what we're going to do is examine one of the major communication systems of your body, which in turn has major effects on metabolic function. Now, what do I mean by crash course? I mean that we're going to do this really quickly and we're going to leave out a lot. So today's little mini lesson on the endocrine system is going to only focus on things that involve metabolism and serve our purposes for now, and is certainly not a complete lesson or teaching on the endocrine system. Later this year, we will learn some systems of the body as we dissect them, and the endocrine system is not one of those. So this also is a great opportunity to take a look at one of those systems here earlier in our year. So first, what is the endocrine system? So you've probably heard this term before, and maybe not really known what they were talking about. So the endocrine system is a series of glands that release hormones into the bloodstream. And as I said a moment ago, this is one of the major communication systems of our body. So one of the ways that a lot of cells communicate with other cells is by releasing hormones. So two things to define here. First, what is a gland? All right, a gland is any tissue that generates hormones, which then means that we need to define something else, and that is, what is a hormone? A hormone is a chemical messenger in the body. Now, many hormones are protein-based, like insulin. Other proteins are lipid-based and are made from cholesterol. So these can vary in their structure. The main thing is that these hormones, as it says above, are released into the bloodstream, which means that they can travel far distances, long distances in your body. They can affect many different tissues, and they can affect those tissues in many different ways. Now, hormones are also often seen working in cascades. Now, what this means is that one hormone might cause the release of a second hormone, which might cause the release of a third hormone, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, as you might guess, the endocrine system can get pretty complicated, but luckily for us, we're going to try to keep it pretty simplistic for what we're doing. Now, there are many different endocrine glands in the body. And honestly, it kind of depends on the source that you look at. Different textbooks or different websites will tell you that there are different numbers of endocrine glands, and it kind of just depends on how they break things down. But what I'd like to look at are sort of the 5 primary endocrine glands. So I'm going to draw sort of a highly detailed gingerbread man here. And so you have to use your imagination that this looks like a real human. And we're going to take a look at 5 major endocrine glands. So the first thing I'm going to draw is your brain. All right, I'm really good at this. Okay, there's your brain. And on your brain, on kind of the inferior side of it, you've got this little thing hanging off of there. It's called the pituitary gland. Now, this pituitary gland, as we'll talk about in just a moment, is a super important gland. Now, some sources also talk about the hypothalamus, which is actually part of the brain, because the hypothalamus sort of helps control your pituitary, but we're going to leave that alone and just focus on the pituitary as one of these glands. The second one that we're going to take a look at is the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is sort of butterfly shaped. It is found in your neck, sort of like just below where your Adam's apple would be. So if you feel that area, you feel your trachea there. But if you kind of feel a little, just kind of a bigger notch, that's probably your thyroid gland that you're feeling. Now, the third thing I'm going to draw is I'm going to draw kidneys on this guy. But I'm not drawing the kidneys because we're learning about them. I'm drawing the kidneys because we want to look into a gland that's sort of triangular in shape that sits on top of each kidney. And these are called your adrenal glands. And you got two of those. Also, sort of in that general area, I'm running out of colors here, you do have your pancreas. So we'll go with blue here for that. And we've learned about the pancreas already, but that would be included as one of these major endocrine glands. So as we learned already this year, insulin and glucagon are pancreatic hormones, and their role in metabolism is to help control glucose levels in your blood, which is a very important part of metabolism. Now, the last endocrine gland that I'm going to mention is just the reproductive glands. So for females, we're talking about ovaries, right? For males, we'd be talking about testes. So these obviously deal with reproductive hormones, which do play some role in metabolism, but it's not quite as clear there. So what we're going to focus on in our little crash course lesson is what about these three glands here that we haven't already heard about this year? Because each of these plays a really important role in controlling your body's metabolism. So let's start with the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland, which again is found sort of on the underside or inferior side of your brain, right in here. And the pituitary gland is oftentimes referred to as the master gland because its job is to regulate other glands. So it secretes several different hormones, each of which goes out to another gland and stimulates that gland. So, which ones are we interested in? The first one we'll mention is one that we're not going to really get into much at all, and that's growth hormone. So the pituitary gland secretes growth hormone, which does exactly what it sounds like. It stimulates growth in the body. As you might guess, this is a little bit more active, and you see more growth hormone in younger people because they are growing compared to older people. But everybody throughout their life secretes growth hormone from the pituitary. Now, the second one we'll mention, it's a really big word here, is called adrenocorticotropic hormone. So adrenocorticotropic hormone. Thankfully, we have an abbreviation, and that's ACTH. Now, what adrenocorticotropic hormone does is it stimulates the adrenal glands that we mentioned a second ago. So we'll come back to this one here in a minute. Now, the third one we're going to mention is called follicle stimulating hormone. Also has an abbreviation, which is FSH. You're going to see this in you guys because this is a hormone that stimulates the ovaries to release other hormones like your estrogens or progesterone. And then the last one we're going to mention is thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. And hopefully it's pretty obvious that this one stimulates the thyroid gland. So we're going to take a little closer look at this ACTH, and we're going to take a little closer look at this TSH hormone. But the main thing to say here about the pituitary before we leave it is that if the pituitary is messed up in some way, in which it is secreting or releasing too much of a hormone, that's also going to cause too much activity in those other glands. So what we sometimes see is that someone has a pituitary tumor. And if you have a pituitary tumor and it increases the activity of the pituitary gland, right, then what we see is that all these other glands also have an increase in their stimulation. And then we can get all kinds of crazy symptoms as a result. All right, so after the pituitary, let's take a look at your thyroid gland. Again, this was the gland that's found there in your neck around your Adam's apple. And this might be an oversimplification, but all we're going to say here is that the thyroid gland regulates body metabolism. So it regulates your metabolism. In other words, it controls how you use energy. Now, the thyroid gland releases two hormones. One of those is called triiodothyronine, and that is a major mouthful, so we just call that T3. And the second one is called thyroxine, which is not as big of a mouthful, but we still abbreviate that one too as T4. Now, these two hormones will go out to different cells and different tissues and affect the metabolism. So the question becomes, how does the thyroid get stimulated? So let's go back to drawing pictures again. So here's our brain. I think I'm getting worse at drawing this. And you've got your pituitary gland. Right? So we got the pituitary that we mentioned a minute ago. What the pituitary gland does is it secretes thyroid stimulating hormone. And thyroid stimulating hormone has a positive effect on your thyroid gland. So what the thyroid gland then does is it releases T3 and T4, which then go out to all these different tissues and affect your metabolism. So in other words, TSH from the pituitary leads to T3 and T4 from the thyroid. These go out to various cells and affect how those cells are let's say how much carbohydrate those cells use. And that is the simplest way to explain how they affect your metabolism, is they affect how much glucose or other carbohydrates are used by the cells. Now in the body, you have to keep this in balance, right? So in terms of those thyroid hormones, we never want too much and we never want too little. And as you'll find out shortly, we see both of those things in some disorders. Hyperthyroidism, too much thyroid hormone, and hypothyroidism, too little. This brings up a really important point that I should have made earlier, right? And that is that homeostasis is life. Homeostasis, the balance. And your metabolism is a huge part of homeostasis. And controlling your metabolism is in part the job of the endocrine system. So if the endocrine system is messed up, then we're not going to be in homeostasis and you might just be dead. The last gland that we're going to look at then are the adrenal glands. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the adrenal glands are found kind of right on top or sitting on top of each of your kidneys. And the adrenal glands are also controlled by the pituitary. So, picture time again. All right, so here's our brain. Here's that awful pituitary gland drawing. And if you remember, the pituitary gland also releases ACTH, that hormone that stimulates the adrenals. So, again, we've got our kidneys down here. And sitting right on top of them, we have these adrenal glands. Now, the adrenal glands actually generate several hormones themselves. But we just want to look at two of those that have a really direct relation to your metabolism. And those two things that will be stimulated or will be released as a result of ACTH are epinephrine, which you might know as another name, which is adrenaline. Adrenal glands, adrenaline, get it? And the other one is cortisol. So let's take a look at each of these with a little more space here. So first, epinephrine. I'm pretty confident that all of you guys have heard of adrenaline before. And you probably know what adrenaline means, right? We talk about adrenaline junkies. I just threw my stylus across the room accidentally. So adrenaline junkies are, individuals who like to skydive or that sort of thing. Maybe you like roller coasters because it gets your adrenaline going, right? But adrenaline is a hormone that is released when your body is stressed. Now, that could mean lots of things, right? It could mean you're stressed because you have a test at school. It could mean you're stressed because there's a really scary person in a dark alley that you're trying to walk down. It could be stressed because you are exercising really hard. But in stress, your pituitary releases ACTH, and then your adrenal glands release epinephrine. Now, epinephrine targets many different tissues and causes all sorts of different things to happen. But what you might have heard of in the past also is the fight or flight response. So when you are under stress, let's say you're walking down a dark alley and a creepy guy pops out at you, your body does some very rapid things to prepare itself to either fight and defend itself or help you run away. So basically, it stops functions that you don't need at that moment, and it helps other functions that you do. So for instance, it increases your heart rate, it increases your breathing rate, It causes your eyes to dilate so that more light gets in and you can see better. But for us, we're just focused on metabolism. So what does epinephrine do in terms of your metabolism? Well, epinephrine goes to primarily your liver, but other tissues too, and it causes an increased breakdown of stored carbs. In the liver. When that happens, it frees glucose, which goes to your cells, and your cells can use that for energy. So epinephrine released by the adrenal glands will cause your tissues to break down stored sugars so that you can use those for energy to do whatever it is you need to do, maybe run away or something like that. Now, you might have heard before, if you have increased adrenaline levels or epinephrine levels all the time, it can be bad for your body. And in modern times, that usually doesn't mean that you're stressed because you need to defend yourself. It probably means you're stressed because of school or work or whatever. So it definitely is good for you to come up with things that help you relax so that you're not constantly stressed and you're not constantly releasing epinephrine. The other hormone that we are going to focus on from the adrenal glands is called cortisol. And cortisol might be the most important hormone in terms of metabolism. So it is a very important metabolism regulator in your body. It does lots of different things, right? It has many jobs for your body. It would take us a long time to go through all the things that cortisol does for you. But it does affect your metabolism, like we're saying. It also helps control your blood pressure, helps control your immune system. It's involved in inflammation. So it is a steroid hormone, and it is involved in all sorts of different things. Now, it is also released during stress because it's really under the same control system. So again, if you are stressed, the pituitary releases that ACTH, and your adrenal glands not only release epinephrine, but they release cortisol as well. Now, what this one does in terms of metabolism is it causes your liver to increase breakdown of protein stores for energy. So epinephrine helped release energy from stored carbohydrates, and cortisol helps release energy from stored proteins. So both of these affect how your cells use energy because they affect, how much of those stored carbohydrates and proteins actually get used. Now, cortisol is a little dangerous because if it is increased for prolonged periods, it can cause an increase in blood sugar, and it can cause an increase in fat development. So believe it or not, if you're under a lot of stress, and you might not watch your diet very well in those situations, cortisol can actually cause you to gain some weight. So, next up is for you to explore some disorders. So I've got a little assignment here for you to look into 4 different metabolic disorders that are tied to these glands that we just talked about. And then in the next classes ahead, we're going to shift into the molecular aspects of metabolism. Thanks for listening. Hopefully this wasn't too bad.